US President Joe Biden faces new challenges over the Omicron variant. And the tiny island nation of Barbados becomes the world's newest republic. Hello, I'm Arnold Naidu, and this is The Heat. After 400 years, Barbados has cut ties with the British monarchy, removing Queen Elizabeth II as its head of state. We'll get to that story shortly, but first let's look at some of the critical challenges US President Joe Biden faces. A new COVID-19 variant is spreading through the country, and a new jobs report has shown much lower gains than expected, driving down expectations of robust economic growth. What will Biden's plans be moving forward as the pandemic lingers on? Joining us now to talk about this from New York is John Burnett. He is the managing director and founder of One Empire Group, a US-based consulting firm. Here in Washington, D.C., Jacquie Luqman is the co-host of By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik. Out of Raleigh, North Carolina, Dr. Krishna Udayakumar is the founding director of the Duke Global Health Innovation Center. Welcome to all of you to the show. And Dr. Udayakumar, let me start with you. Let's start talking about this new variant, Omicron, which we understand is now in 6 US states at last count. South African scientists, these scientists were the first to alert us to the existence of this variant. They're telling us right now that the virus, the Omicron variant, is spreading at a much faster rate than other viruses. But there haven't been too many people who've got seriously ill. What can you tell us about the virus? What do we know so far, and what will we be looking for in the days ahead?
Yeah, so there are some reasons for concern with what we're seeing, but the takeaway is really it's too early to know anything definitively. It has been declared a variant of concern by the World Health Organization and others. It's now in at least 38 countries that we've seen this Omicron variant. The level and number of mutations that it has is what has led to some areas of concern. And there are really 3 pieces of this that we should unpack. The first is that it may have increased transmissibility, and there is some early evidence to show that that may actually be the case. And if so, we would expect it to actually become the dominant variant over time. The second is whether there may be some component of immune evasion. So people that have been infected in the past may be less protected with that natural immunity. And secondly, people that have been vaccinated may be less protected than they would be otherwise. What we are seeing there is that from the data in South Africa, does seem to be some directionality that there is increasing risk of reinfection relative to other variants in the past. And then the third, of course, is whether it causes more severe disease, and we don't have any indications that it may do that. So on some of the things that we are concerned about, there are reasons for that concern, but we do need to wait for weeks as we watch the clinical as well as the epidemiological curves to understand what's actually happening with this new variant.
So what would be the worst case scenario in the days ahead?
Yeah, I don't know that we need to speculate about worst case scenario. We know now that this is a variant that has probably been spreading for 6 to 8 weeks, and we are just trying to get a handle on understanding where it is. The real thing we need to keep in mind is to make sure that we're taking a science-driven approach and making sure that we're not overreacting one way or the other. We, on one hand, don't want to lock down the whole global economy and panic. On the other hand, we don't want to blow this off because we know that we have to increase our mitigation measures, which means increasing the rates of vaccinations, making sure that we're doing better testing and surveillance, and also increasing rates of things like masking and other public health measures to make sure that we handle this as we should.
Jacquie, if we look at the United States, President Biden has announced measures to combat the spread of this new variant, Omicron. Let's listen to some of what he had to say.
Today, I'm back to announce our action plan to battle COVID-19 this winter. Not that any of us are surprised any of you, because it's the combined advice from all of you that we developed this plan. And it doesn't include shutdowns or lockdowns, but widespread vaccinations and boosters and testing and a lot more.
So, Jacquie, no lockdowns, but perhaps the most significant measures that the administration has announced are those that will affect international travelers. I mean, experts who've actually advised this administration are already saying that those measures, those travel measures, will largely be ineffective because the virus is already here. The priority, they say, should be to inoculate more people, and that's more people around the world. What do you make of it? Do they have a point?
They absolutely do have a point, especially because the response to the Omicron virus variant, the Omicron variant that was announced in South Africa, was responded to by the United States government with a shutdown against travel from South Africa and surrounding South African countries. So even though the Biden administration, Joe Biden, announced that he wouldn't institute a lockdown or a shutdown here in the United States, he absolutely instituted a shutdown of incoming travelers from South Africa, practically punishing the country and the region in Africa for being vigilant with their surveillance of the variant and announcing that the variant existed, and saying that Joe Biden saying that, continuing to say that the administration will take a scientific approach. He's been saying that for a while. Well, this travel ban was not based on any science because it was implemented immediately after the scientists in South Africa announced the existence of the variant. But now, less than a week later, we find out that people in the Netherlands, someone in the Netherlands tested positive for the virus, for the variant, as early as November 7th. So there is no information. We do not know where this variant actually originated from, but the Biden administration already implemented a travel lockdown against the country that was forthcoming in reporting the existence of the variant. And it's as if they're being punished for doing a better job at surveilling, testing and tracing and surveilling the virus in their country than the United States government has done in doing any of those things, and a lot more in response to the pandemic in this country.
John Burnett, since the existence of the new variant was announced, what do you make of the measures that the Biden administration has taken?
Well, I agree with my fellow panelists. I think it was a knee-jerk reaction towards South Africa, as she eloquently stated, that they were forthright. And they also provided their medical opinion in terms of the contagious level of this variant, as well as its potential impact. They said it's more contagious, but it doesn't seem to be as deadly based upon the data that they collected up to this point. So they were forthright, and they gave us their scientific opinion. So I don't think it should be a knee-jerk reaction as the Biden administration has taken against South Africa. But at the same time, I do understand the need to implement, let's say, a rapid test within 24 hours of getting on the flight. Perhaps that might be a better compromise with South Africa opposed to an outright ban. But also, it should give travelers a higher comfort level to travel, especially on long flights, right? So there's the scientific element, wanting to keep people safe, but also reduce risk and encourage traveling. Mm-hmm. So, and then we also know that Biden currently has a lockdown mandate that for large corporations that's being held up in court. So he may be waiting to see what is the outcome of that particular litigation before he contemplates further action in the forms of shutdowns, lockdowns, and whatever you want to call it. But we should not embrace halting our economy. Our economy is trying to recover from the previous shutdowns in the form of the supply chain shortages, right? So we're still trying to ramp up and get back to normal. The last thing we should do is engage lockdowns that will have further implications on employment as well as our business environment, both small and large, and being able to get back to normal.
John, politics is also complicating the situation in the United States. I mean, there is a clear political divide on how this pandemic has been handled, and that's from day one. I mean, Republicans have told us that they oppose to mandates on vaccinations, but something has changed with the emergence of this variant. President Biden, in fact, told us that since we've heard about Omicron, up to 30% of those people who have not been vaccinated, who say that they would not have taken the vaccine, now say, well, they're reconsidering. They will take the vaccine right now. Do you think that will change the minds of many people?
I think it's a combination of different things. I think at this juncture, people are not just reacting on the initial news. They really want to understand more information. So it's programs like this and others that actually bring a balanced approach to the current events, in this case, the Omicron variant. But we do know that both small and large corporations are implementing their own policies, and many of them are requiring vaccination, right, or some other testing requirements in order to come back to work. So I think it's a combination of different things, the new variant as well as people wanting to get back to work, finding new job opportunities. So I think we have a lot of those things coming all at once. And we have to make sure that we're protecting the most vulnerable first, as we saw with the original COVID-19 virus. And we want to make sure that we reasonably and responsibly, in a risk management framework, get back to normal as fast as we can in a responsible way.
Right. Dr. Udayakumar, we already have several vaccines. We've had them for just under a year right now, and people around the world have been getting these vaccines. But when we have a variant like Omicron, does it mean that we have to change vaccines, that we have to get a different kind of shot?
Yeah, it's a good question. And just to clarify the last part of the conversation, it's absolutely the case that crude and unfocused travel lockdowns around the world are, in this case, not only ineffective, but they're counterproductive. We should note that dozens and dozens of countries have used that same mechanism of travel lockdowns, the U.S. being one of many, and certainly not the first to put that in place. So we have got room for improvement in our science-based policymaking around the world. In terms of new vaccine development, what we know is that vaccines lead to different types of immunity, but they can be limited based on the type of mutations that the virus takes on over time. What we need to understand with the Omicron variant is, given the high number of mutations, especially on the spike protein, whether it may cause our vaccine-mediated immunity to be lower than it is for other types, the other variants that we've seen so far. There will be some laboratory-based data that comes out over the coming days, but that will not give us definitive proof. Part of why we have to wait is to track the clinical outcomes of people that have been vaccinated to see what actually happens with this Omicron variant. I think we can be modestly optimistic that even if it's not full protection, that there still will be some protection from our current vaccines, especially if people are fully vaccinated, against severe disease, which includes hospitalization and death. So it's not a simple yes-no type of answer, but it may be slightly less immunity relative to what would be otherwise. But the key recommendation coming out of that understanding is still the same. We need more people to be fully vaccinated to protect themselves and to protect their populations.
Okay, Jacquie, I want to move on to another challenge facing the Biden administration, and that is the latest jobs report, which was announced this morning. 210,000 jobs were added in November. That was less than the market was expecting. But what is happening here? Because there are still so many jobs that have not been filled, a shortage of labor in so many sectors.
Well, I think calling it a shortage of labor is kind of incorrect, but I understand the political need to do that because it puts the onus on the people who are not filling the jobs as opposed to the companies and the businesses and even the government for not ensuring that these jobs are good paying jobs that pay a living wage, that are safe, that provide benefits, that support people's well-being and a decent standard of living. And many of these jobs do not. They just do not. It's one thing to add to say that you are expecting to add over 500,000 jobs back to the economy to get things back to normal, economically.
Right.
But what was that normal before the pandemic? This is why there has been a wave of strikes in so many industries, blue collar, factory, service industries across this country, because normal was not sufficient for the needs of working people. There's been a 10% increase in rent in this country since the pandemic, and there has not been a 10% increase in people's income. So it's not a labor shortage that's a problem. It is a shortage of decent, good paying, life sustaining jobs.
Okay, John, unfortunately, I've only got about 40 seconds for this, but what do you make of the latest jobs numbers? I mean, Biden has been very positive about the economy. He thinks and tells us that the economy is on a winning streak right now.
Well, you know what? If you actually speak to people across America, they will say that not only are wages stagnant, look at the price of groceries. Look at the price of fuel. Look at the price of everything. So we're actually in an inflationary market where, and based upon the forecast, it doesn't look like it's going to slow down anytime soon.
Okay.
So it's not a great report.
Okay, we have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Our next story is from Barbados. The small Caribbean island has become the world's newest republic. It severed ties with the British monarchy this week. Barbados gained its independence from Britain in 1966, but kept the Queen as its head of state. However, earlier this week, it cut those ties and a new president was sworn in. I spoke with the former governor of the Central Bank of Barbados, Delisle Worrell, and historian Vijay Prashad. I first asked Delisle what prompted Barbados to become a republic.
Essentially by political considerations. So we actually cut ties 55 years ago when we became independent. So what we have done in a few days ago really is just a change in the title of the ceremonial head of state. So the person that was previously called the Governor General is now going to be called the President. But that's all that has changed. So we essentially moved from a Canadian model to an Indian model. So there is a Governor General of Canada who only carries out ceremonial duties and has no role in the government of Canada. And similarly, in India, there's a president. But the person who actually is in charge of the government and the cabinet and so on is the prime minister. And that is the situation that existed before and after the change in Barbados. Now, there are problems that we have with the government, with governance of the country, which need to be addressed. But that the constitutional changes and other changes that would be necessary have not yet been addressed.
Vijay Prashad, Barbados is a small country in the Caribbean, but it has taken this decision. What is the broader message that something like this sends to the world?
Well, I want to say that the actions of Mia Mottley are quite considerable. You know, she is a person who understands the symbolic. In 2019, she took some of the remains of people who had been enslaved and buried in Barbados and carried them back to Ghana, and in a big celebration there, buried them on Ghanaian soil as a way to offer a deep criticism of British colonialism and slavery. You know, Ms. Mottley has also spoken with great force at the UN General Assembly condemning the way in which the great powers seem to lean on small countries. And then again, at COP26, she spoke with great passion about how mostly the Western countries have basically ignored climate science and condemned countries like Barbados to the difficulties of the climate catastrophe. Well, this action taken by Ms. Motley is, of course, long overdue. And in fact, Errol Barrow, who was the prime minister in the 1970s, had done a lot to seed the terrain for this. You know, he had already disestablished the Anglican Church. He already had the parliament take control over various sections of the government, democratized the government, and so on. It just waited for this last action. Owen Arthur's report in 1998 already said that this should be done, but it took somebody of the ambition and the kind of symbolic clarity of Mia Motley to carry it through. And it's had a big impact around the world because people are, you know, they feel the remnants of colonialism and they're happy to see one more stronghold of it collapse.
Delisle, of course, not everyone in Barbados is happy with this decision to become a republic. Here's one person we spoke to. Let's listen.
I don't think that Barbados is ready for that, as to be, but we are already independent, and we are, you know, we're still struggling. Yes, we may be stronger in the Caribbean, but yes, still, I don't think for us to be on our own, we are ready for that.
So, Delisle, what do you make of that? I mean, there you heard someone who says that, look, it may have been better to retain ties.
Yes, actually, the main reaction in Barbados is indifference, because, as I said, we have fundamental problems. So there are three major problems that Barbadians are mainly concerned about. One has to do with the Constitution. So we have a very robust electoral system, which we're all very proud of, but it produces skewed results in the parliament. So in the last general election in 2018, the current ruling party had an overwhelming majority of the votes, the largest that there has ever been. However, there was 27% of those who voted for other parties, but those parties are not represented in either of the houses of parliament. Now, ever since 1955, we have had a succession, not every time, but the majority of time of the elections have produced skewed results, which are not fully representative of the votes that were cast. That is the first and most fundamental thing that has to be addressed with respect to the Constitution. But there are other pressing issues. The second one is the inefficiency of our public services. So we've had a decline in the efficiency of the public services, which affects every aspect of life in Barbados, and which has cost us in investments that we should have had hundreds of millions of dollars. And that has to be addressed. And the third thing that the ordinary Barbadian is really very concerned about is the economy. So our economy has stagnated for over a decade. And thanks to COVID, it declined by 18%, contracted by 18% in 2020. But the government lacks any kind of a long-term perspective, planning perspective, to address the structural weaknesses of the economy and to chart a way forward. I think that is most clearly manifested with respect to the commitment for renewable energy, for example. I can elaborate on that if you would like.
Yeah. Vijay, something that we don't hear about very often is the Barbados legacy in the transatlantic slave trade. In fact, the Barbados historian Hilary Beckles, he's written that Barbados was the colonial site of Britain's first, quote, black slave society, which he described as, quote again, the most systematically violent, brutal and racially inhumane society of modernity. In fact, we know that Barbados was at the center of this slave trade. Has there ever been an acknowledgement by Britain of this?
Well, forget an acknowledgement. Look, I mean, I quite agree that there are fundamental problems that afflict Barbados as they afflict many of the countries in the Caribbean. The English-speaking countries at the head are in serious crisis. But what is the root of this crisis? I mean, the fact is that after slavery had been abolished, many of these countries faced a great capital shortage. You know, the West, which had made money off the islands of the Caribbean, never really were willing to provide, let's call them what they should be called, reparations for this. Where was the money paid back for what had been stolen, for the kind of lives lost and so on? Instead of that, the British Parliament spent decades paying off until, in fact, the prime ministership of David Cameron, the British Parliament was paying off the men who owned slaves in Jamaica. That means Britain was willing to pay reparations to the slave holders until the tenure of David Cameron. That's when they finally paid them off. Didn't pay even £1 to the people who survived enslavement, didn't pay £1 for the development of the countries of the Caribbean. Instead, of course, British intelligence played its own dirty games against the idea of the West Indian Federation, and of course helped remove governments. As we know, the government of Chedi Jagan in Guyana, overthrown by a CIA, a British intelligence coup. We know that in 1976 in Barbados, Errol himself on many occasions said he felt that his government faced destabilization pressure, most likely from Britain. If, by the way, Errol was able to win in 1976, likely in 1977, they would have made this transition to a republic. Got to understand how Britain played not only the role of leeching the wealth of the Caribbean, but also continued to destabilize any attempt, including the government of Michael Manley in Jamaica, destabilize an attempt to create a modern society in the Caribbean.
Okay, and we need to leave it there. Thanks to both of you, Vijay Prashad, Dalal Worrell, for being with us. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.